When my brother and I got the house from my uncle, everything seemed so simple. It's a common story. Someone dies and leaves real estate to relatives, who decide what to do with it. The house stood on the edge of a huge wooded area, deep in the Appalachian Mountains, in a place that almost no one knew about. There was only an unnamed dot on the map, and a couple of abandoned trails. I didn't know my uncle well. His mother rarely mentioned him, usually in an irritated tone. According to her, he was an unsociable, introverted man who spent his whole life among forests, avoiding cities and people. No one had seen him for years, until one day the local sheriff found him dead in an old armchair by the fireplace. The cause of death was a heart attack. Everything looked natural, and there were no official questions. My brother immediately said, "We have to go. We sell the house, we get the money. Simple and fast." This idea seemed reasonable to me. I was sitting at a dull job at that time, paying the loan for the car and surviving in the gray everyday life. The opportunity to earn some money looked like luck. We left early in the morning. The car was shaking along the beaten gravel road, and the thick fog, clinging to the hood, turned everything around into an indistinct pale mess. The forest stood in a dense wall, as if the trees were pressing against each other, fused together in crowns, leaving no room for light. When we got home, the sun was already setting. An old, rickety house stood among the undergrowth. Its walls were blackened with age, the roof sagged, and the fence around it had fallen apart. Rotten boards covered with gray moss lay on the porch. To be honest, the first look at it knocked the enthusiasm out of me. I even wondered if it was worth it. But my brother insisted, "I don't care about the appearance. The main thing is the land. There are 10 acres here. It costs money." We spent the first night in the house, almost without sleep. It smelled damp and musty inside. The wooden walls creaked even without the wind, and the floor buckled dangerously underfoot. We were sitting on an old sofa in the living room, drinking cheap beer and joking to drown out the awkwardness. I remember noticing a strange thing after midnight. The forest around me seemed to come to life. At first I thought I was imagining things. But it was worth listening to. Trees creaked in the distance, bark flapped, as if something heavy was moving between the trunks. Sometimes there was a crunch, not of branches, but as if something heavy was stepping on rocks and dry ground. My brother waved me off. "Deer. Or bears. It's a wild wilderness." The next morning we decided to take a closer look at the house. Most of the rooms were empty, with collapsed furniture and a thick layer of dust. We found a chest in the attic. It's old, with rusty hinges. Inside were letters, some tattered photographs, and a couple of his uncle's personal belongings. The letters were strange. The handwriting was confused, the letters danced on the paper. In them, he complained about the sound coming from the forest, the bad ground, and the trees that whisper. One of the excerpts read, "If anyone is reading this, don't stay here. The forest will take away anyone who stays too long. I hear them calling me every night." My brother chuckled, saying that my uncle was just crazy. But I couldn't get rid of the feeling that every word in these letters was written in a clear mind. There were too many details, too much despair between the lines. We spent the day clearing rubble and exploring the area. There was a path leading into the woods behind the house. It was barely noticeable, overgrown, but the trail was still discernible. I stood at the beginning of the trail, staring into the darkness between the trees, feeling my insides clench. I didn't want to go there. In the late afternoon, my brother insisted, "Let's go take a look at what's in there." Maybe my uncle was hiding something. Old people always like to arrange hiding places. We took lanterns and knives and went into the forest. The path led downhill, among old elms and maples, whose roots were crawling out of the ground, as if trying to catch us by the legs. The further we walked, the quieter it became. No birds, no insects. Only the creak of his own footsteps. Half an hour later, we came across an old booth, half filled up with earth. The door was hanging on one hinge, and the inside smelled rotten. There were only old crates and rotten rags inside. Nothing of value. Just one strange find, an inscription scratched on the wall. "You're already too far away. They can hear you." I felt the hairs on my arms stand on end. My brother laughed again, saying that these were jokes by local jerks. But when we turned back, it became clear that something had changed. The path we had come along seemed to have disappeared. The forest looked the same from all sides. The lantern picked out only a tangle of branches, roots, and fog from the darkness. We walked blindly, trying to get out. The air thickened, became heavier. Somewhere to the side, a short, sharp crack was heard, as if someone was breaking a branch under his foot. My brother went ahead, not listening to my entreaties to return to the booth and try to spend the night there. "We have to move," he kept repeating. But the more we walked, the stronger the feeling became that someone was watching us. I stood holding the lantern with a shaking hand, peering at that damned note nailed to a tree with a rusty knife. "Don't turn around. Just go." Simple words, but they stuck in my brain like a nail. I could feel something behind us in the forest. I felt it not with my ears, not with my eyes, but with my whole body. A dull weight pressed down on my shoulders, as if someone invisible was breathing down my neck. I shouted to my brother, but my voice broke. The air around her seemed to thicken, and the words stuck in her throat. He stood a couple of steps ahead, the light of his flashlight wavering, picking out chunks of wet earth and sprawling roots. "Let's go," he croaked, not even turning around. And I followed him. We walked fast, almost running, with lanterns dangling from our hands. Branches scratched my face, slapped my clothes, and one hit me right in the eye. I felt something hot slide down my cheek, but I didn't stop. It was impossible to stop. Then the ground went down sharply under my feet. We rolled down the hill, mud got into our shoes, and my fingers were covered in blood, but I was only glad of this fall. The main thing is to move. Don't stop. Don't think about the note. At the bottom of the ravine, we came across an old abandoned camp. A tattered tent, cold campfires piled up, rusty food cans. The trash was scattered as if people were fleeing in panic. And the strangest thing was that it all looked relatively fresh. Not abandoned for years, no. It's like someone dropped it yesterday. I found another note on the ground. A chewed-up piece of paper covered in small letters. The handwriting was uneven, as if it had been written in a hurry. "If you're here, it's too late. The forest does not let out. Keep your strength. Don't shine at night." I squeezed it in my fist, feeling the cold stick to my palm along with dirt and sweat. With every step it became clearer. We weren't just lost. There's something wrong here. My brother inspected the camp and offered to stay until dawn. "The darkness is gathering. Wandering around at night is suicide," he muttered. I nodded. We gathered the pieces of firewood, built a fire, trying to keep the fire small so as not to attract attention. Although I didn't even want to think about who we were afraid of attracting. When night finally fell, the real nightmare began. At first, there were quiet sounds. The rattle. It was like someone was scratching on the bark of trees. Then there were clicks, as if someone was breaking branches slowly and deliberately, close by, beyond the edge of the fire. My brother pulled out a knife, and I gripped a thick branch in my hands like a club. We sat back to back by the campfire, staring at each other. 2 hours later, my brother said that he would go a couple of steps to the side to relieve himself. I was against it, but he just waved me off. The light of the lantern flashed in the darkness and disappeared. 5 minutes have passed. 10, 15. I sat listening to the crackling of the campfire. Then I heard, no, rather felt, something approaching. I jumped up, holding the branch in front of me like a weapon. My brother stumbled out of the darkness. He was covered in mud, with a split lip and a torn jacket. He was breathing fast and noisily, as if after a long run. "There's someone there," he croaked, glancing over his shoulder. "They're coming for us." I didn't ask any questions. We grabbed our lanterns and knives, left the fire burning out and ran away into the forest, into the darkness. Running blindly through the night forest is worse than any nightmare. You stumble, crash into trees, fall face first into the mud, and tear your clothes to shreds. The forest seemed to shrink around them, preventing them from passing. Branches scratched his skin like claws, and the ground beneath his feet sank treacherously. And all the time, I felt it, the weight of the eyes behind my back. It was as if the forest itself was watching us. We ran out into a small clearing lined with the remains of ancient wooden crosses. Some were toppled, others stood askew, overgrown with moss. I didn't know who put them there or why. He didn't want to know. My brother was panting nearby, leaning against one of the crosses. "We need to get to the road," he croaked. "There should be a stream down there. We'll walk along it." I nodded. I didn't have the energy to argue. We walked on, following his flashlight, which was shaking in his hand, picking out narrow strips of light from the darkness. Suddenly, he stopped dead in his tracks. There was another note on the ground in front of us, rolled up into a tube, tied with dirty thread. My brother picked it up and unfolded it. "Read it aloud. You're still walking. You can still hear. You're still alive." He looked at me. I could see in his eyes that he also knew it wasn't a coincidence. Someone was watching us. Someone knew where we were. Someone was playing with us. We moved on, trying to walk faster. But the forest didn't seem to let us go. The more we walked, the more the paths got tangled, crossed, and disappeared. Sometimes we came across strange tracks, deep dents in the ground, tufts of wool, broken branches. Sometimes I could almost hear the voice. A barely discernible whisper, gliding on the wind. But I chased him away. No, it can't be. Just the wind. By morning we were exhausted. His legs were shaking, and his arms were bleeding from the endless falls. We collapsed at an old bridge over a stream, rotten and ready to collapse at the slightest step. My brother rolled over on his back, looking up at the gray morning sky, and said softly, "We're not getting out of here, brother. This forest won't let us go." I wanted to object. To say that everything will be fine. That we'll find a way. That we'll get out. But my tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. I knew he was right, too. And then I noticed one more thing. There was something buried in the mud under the bridge. I saw the corner of an old leather briefcase sticking out of the ground. Carefully, with trembling hands, I dug it out. The buckles are rusted, the leather is cracked. There were notebooks inside. Yellowed pages, covered with dense, small handwriting. The first line on the first page read, "I got lost here last year. I thought I could get out. I was wrong." I held this old notebook in my hands, not believing myself. He flipped through the pages, carefully, as if any careless movement could erase the last traces of the person who left it. Every entry here was steeped in fear and hopelessness. For the first few days, I tried to get out on my own. I walked by the sun, but it's strange here. The light doesn't fall the way it should. The forest leads in a circle. On the third day, I met others. They were silent. They didn't come close. We were just watching from behind the trees. I didn't try to call them, it was useless. They disappeared if you took a step towards them. I looked at my brother. He sat huddled in a ball, clutching his crooked hand to his chest. His face was sallow, and his lips were cracked. He didn't ask what I found. I don't think he cared. I continued reading. Page after page. The story of a man who walked the same path, who stumbled over the same roots and fell into the same ravines. There is no food. There is almost no water. You can't drink from the stream, hallucinations started after it. Or are they not hallucinations? They came closer tonight. I could hear breathing nearby. It smelled damp and rotten. I pretended to be asleep. It helped. For now. I felt a chill run down my spine. Instinctively, he looked back at the forest behind him. He stood motionless, but it seemed that the shadows of the trees were leaning a little closer than before. My brother got up. His gaze was glassy. "We need to leave," he said. "Right now." I tucked the notebook into my bosom, clutching it tighter against my chest. This was the last evidence that we were not the first here. And that there is still a chance of salvation. Or at least there was once. We walked along the stream, holding onto a dilapidated bridge. Sometimes the water splashed under our feet, sometimes we had to climb muddy banks, risking falling into the cold slush. The sun barely penetrated through the dense crowns, as if it, too, was tired of this forest. We found a backpack at one of the corners. Blackened by moisture, tattered. There's a shoe next to it. One. And everything. There are no traces, someone's life stopped here. I hooked the backpack with a stick and carefully opened it. Inside are scraps of clothing, an empty flask, an old lighter, and another note stuffed into a side pocket. Wet, spreading in my hands. If you're reading this, don't stand here for long. They don't like it when you touch someone else's. I dropped my backpack as if I'd been burned. My heart was thudding in my ears. We continued on our way. They weren't walking anymore, they were running as fast as they could. I always had the feeling that we were being overtaken. His lungs burned and his muscles ached, but stopping meant death. And then we ran out to the old road. Asphalt, cracked, overgrown with grass, but it was asphalt. Real, solid. We both screamed with relief. But the joy didn't last long. There were cars parked on the road. Abandoned, covered with moss, with broken windows. Someone tried to get out of here long before us, but couldn't. Some of the doors were open, as if people were jumping out on the run. We came to the same car. Inside there are scattered children's toys, an empty bottle of water and something else. There was a jacket on the back seat. Black, splattered with brown spots. I looked away. My brother managed to say, "Maybe there will be a way out somewhere ahead. The main road. I have to go." We walked along this road, among the dead cars, among the silent witnesses of something terrible. And again, the strangeness started again. Rustling in the bushes. Branches that broke by themselves. The distant echoes of voices are indistinct, like a radio tuned to an empty wave. Every 100 meters we found new evidence of someone else's despair: overturned backpacks, broken phones, discarded shoes. Sometimes there were notes, soaked and torn, but they all said the same thing: run. Don't stop. They're close. We walked until sunset. As darkness descended, I realized that I was starting to lose touch with reality again. The road wound endlessly. The forest was getting denser. The lanterns are dead. The night weighed on my consciousness. We decided to hide in one of the cars, locking the doors and hiding. It seemed that this would give at least the illusion of security. I sat hugging my knees, listening. The rustling did not stop. My brother was trembling next to me. His breathing was ragged, like an exhausted animal. Somewhere nearby, someone dropped something heavy. The sound was muffled and too real. I clutched the old notebook in my fist like an amulet. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow ones. Heavy ones. Right next to it. Someone was walking along the cars, stopping, listening. They were looking for us. My brother looked at me. There was only one thing in his eyes: fear. The footsteps stopped right next to our car. The footsteps stopped next to the car. I wasn't breathing. Even my heart seemed to stop, afraid of giving us away. Inside, everything tensed like a spring. Every nerve screamed, "Don't move." The door handle creaked. Slowly, painfully slowly. Someone tried to pull it. Once, twice. The lock was shaking, resisting, but the door gave way a couple of millimeters, which caused a foul, heavy smell to enter the cabin, as if rotten wet moss mixed with blood rust. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing myself against the seat, feeling my back stick together from sweat with the fabric of my jacket. My brother also froze next to me, clutching my sleeve. I could hear him grinding his teeth, trying to hold back his sobs. The door was yanked again. Stronger. The metal groaned under the strain. And suddenly everything went quiet. The footsteps began to recede. Slowly at first, then faster. We were left alone in a silence so heavy that it seemed to be pressing on our eardrums. It took several long minutes before I dared to exhale. He turned to his brother and whispered, "We can't stay here. If they come back, we're finished." He just nodded. We climbed out, carefully, as if our every move could wake a sleeping animal. Everything was as it had been before: smashed cars, torn bags, an empty road leading into darkness. But now I felt that someone, somewhere, was watching. The forest beyond the road breathed alien life. We walked on, stumbling in the pitch darkness, stumbling over rocks and roots that crawled out onto the asphalt. After a while, I noticed something strange. The road began to narrow. A little bit at first, then harder. It was as if the earth itself was trying to push us back into the forest. The bushes were advancing, the trees were looming over us. And then the road ended. It just ended up going nowhere. The cliff. A chasm yawned in front of us, dark as death itself. I looked down, but I couldn't see the bottom. Only the wind blowing out of the mouth of the abyss stirred the hair on my face. We were trapped. Footsteps sounded from behind. They are no longer single, but there are many. Heavy, confident. Those in a hurry. I turned around. Silhouettes moved in the darkness between the cars. Real, solid, people, or what's left of them. They approached slowly. They had nowhere to hurry. They knew they had us cornered. My brother grabbed my hand. His eyes glittered with fear and understanding. He whispered, "What should I do?" I didn't answer. There was no response. My legs led me back to the cliff. The wind whipped at his face, breaking into a howling howl. The people on the road froze, surrounding us in a semicircle. And then I realized, they were waiting. They were waiting for us to make a decision on our own. There was no turning back. I felt my brother's hand convulsively squeeze mine. We exchanged glances. No words. Only understanding. I closed my eyes. He took a step back. And he fell into the void. The wind tore the scream from my lips. His brother's face disappeared into the pitch blackness. Everything was gone. All that remained was a flight in which there was neither hope nor salvation. The fall lasted forever. And when I finally hit the ground, if you could call it earth, my consciousness flashed white and went out. The last thing I felt was the cold. The cold that permeates the whole body, forever.